All right, welcome to Notes to Fret, everybody, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And in this week's video, we are going to be looking at the sixth as well as our inversions. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into the lesson. And I know that this lesson's a little bit late in coming. There were a few things that came up that I had to get taken care of. So I know that this one's a little bit behind schedule, so I apologize for that. But it is a really important interval that we're going to be discussing, because discussing the sixth really is going to pretty much round out our conversation about intervals within the octave. Now, in this video, we're going to be looking at a couple of different things. First, we're going to be looking at the triads with the sixth, which actually is a less common way that you're going to hear these chords. And then later in the video, we will talk about how the sixth is most frequently used and when it starts sounding fantastic, along with the sixth within a chord progression, right? We've talked about 1, 4, 5s, everything else, but what does the sixth do from our chord progression, not just our chords? So we're going to be diving into that as well. But this first part, even though it's less common usage, is very important to understand. So when you do start looking at the more common usage of the sixth, you'll really understand it. So with that being said, right now we're looking at our C major triad, right? And we've got our major third and a perfect fifth. Now, if we're going to add in our sixth, in this case, which is an A, we need to be paying attention to the distance from our perfect fifth, in this case G, to that sixth, right? So if we look back over at our fretboard, obviously our G is 7 frets up or 7 semitones. And when we go to A, well, that's going to be just 2 frets up or 2 semitones. So we know from G to A is going to be a major second, right? Anytime we move up 2 frets or 2 semitones, that's a major second. But when we look at the root, right, from C to A, that's going to be 9 frets, which is a major sixth. So what we have is a major triad with a major sixth, and that's going to give us our C major sixth. And this is a relatively common chord when it comes to sixth. You'll hear it. It doesn't sound horrible. And we'll be going through the sound of these as well in this video a little bit later. Now, as we address the major sixth, we also have to address the minor sixth, right? So again, from our perfect fifth, in this case G, to A, and we want to say it's a minor second, well, obviously A doesn't work, so we have to flatten it. So now we have A flat. Now we're out of key, but what about from the root to the A flat? Well, that's a minor sixth, right? We've got 8 frets or 8 semitones, however you want to look at it. And here we have a chord that is very infrequently, if ever, used. And it also has this strange notation. This add, when we say a chord has an add, right, a C major add sixth, what we're saying is we have a triad, in this case C, E, and G. And let's say that we said add ninth. Well, what we would say, what we're meaning in that case is we're just going to add the ninth, but we're not going to include the seventh or anything else. So it just means add this one other thing. Don't manipulate the triad. Don't do anything else with it. Don't just keep the triad and just add this additional note, right? Because if you talk about minor ninths or something like that, then you could have a sixth interval, you could have a seventh interval in there, you could have a bunch of other stuff. So an add sixth doesn't really make a lot of sense with the triad because there's really not too terribly much to add. You could add in a fourth or a second, but whatever. So that's all that add means. The reason I have it in here is because you may see it out there. It's not likely that you will. It's probably going to be a C major flat sixth if you ever see it at all, because it's not a common chord, and you'll hear why a little bit later. But this is our major triad with the sixth interval, right? The minor sixth interval with the major triad, not common. With the major triad and the major sixth, it sounds okay. It's not huge. It's not often out there, but it sounds decent enough to use. Now, when we're talking about our major triad, we also have to talk about our minor triad, right? And so in this case, I'm just going to keep with A minor again. So the flats and the sharps don't make any difference right now. So here we have a minor third and a perfect fifth, no problem, right? We've seen this before. We go out to our E, perfect fifth. Now here we need to look at the minor triad with either a minor sixth or a major sixth. But since we're staying in key, let's look at the minor sixth first. And in that case, we have an F. And here, from our E to our F, it's a minor second, which we know is 1 fret, right? And so when we look at A to F, that's going to be a minor sixth because it's only 8 frets up, right? So this chord right here, it's in key, and we have an A minor triad with a minor sixth. Again, whether or not you see that add sixth out there, you may or may not see it, so that's why I'm including it here. But this chord, not often used, and we'll hear why in a little while. But with that being said, we also have the A minor triad with a major sixth. All right, so here we have to obviously sharpen the F to get it to a major sixth or major second from E and a major sixth from our root, which in this case is A. So when we have F sharp, we are now at 9 frets, right? Or 9 semitones. So this chord right here, yes, we're out of key, but this is an A minor sixth. This one you can hear more frequently. It has its tone, but the A minor with that flattened sixth, that even though it's in key, that's unique. And we'll hear these sounds here coming up. And with that, here's kind of the typical notation that you'll see. The perfect, the C major at the top with the major sixth, in this case our A, it's usually just written C6. And so it's out there. Again, the major triad with the flattened sixth, you may hear it somewhere. We'll hear it in a little bit. And then our minor with our major sixth, right? We have an A, that's our A minor sixth, right? It's just getting the minor from the name of the triad. Now I'm looking down at the lower part of the screen now. And then the A minor with the flattened sixth, right? In that case, F. But let's go ahead and jump in and actually listen to these so we can actually hear them before we start talking about how the sixth is actually used more often. Okay, so really quick, when we're talking about our sixth interval, really, do we put that interval in along with our, typical triad? So let's start with A minor. Just listen to the triad. We've all heard that before. Now, if we add in the sixth, in this case, staying in key, which means we would add in the F, but that's a minor sixth. So let's listen to the minor triad and adding in the minor sixth. You can probably see where not a lot of folks are using that minor triad with the minor sixth. But let's see what the minor triad with the major sixth sounds like. Now here, we have to go out of key because now we're going to bring in that F sharp. So you can kind of hear that minor triad with the major sixth still, doesn't sound great. Now let's see about the major triad and how that incorporates with a major and minor sixth. So just going to the C major. And again, I'm just using the A minor and C major because our ear has heard it so many times before that it's very easy to pick up nuanced subtleties and you can really hear differences. So that's what I'm trying to get across is how these things sound. So here, if we're talking about C major, right, heard it 1,000,001 times. And if we're going to add in the sixth, in this case is the A, but that's a major sixth. So let's listen to the major triad with a major sixth. Okay, not bad. Now let's listen to that major triad with the minor sixth. In this case, we're going to go out of the key because we're going to have to do an A minor to do the minor sixth, right? So here, probably don't really have to tell you, what's, what that one's all about. But you may be thinking, okay, well, the triads with the major minor sixth, I mean, they don't sound, some of them sound pretty bad, but others, whatever. But typically that's really not where you hear the sixth. Now, where you will hear the sixth is when we start talking about our inversions, right? So here, if this is my A minor, and I want to go to my first inversion, there's my first inversion. And where's my sixth coming in? My sixth from C to A. So in our first inversions, we have a sixth already in there, right? So even when we're talking about our C major, but here, mess that up a little, but you can hear that sixth in there on the first inversion a little bit. And also if you're just kind of playing with the fourths and the sixths together, right? So let's say I had a D minor inverted, first inversion of D minor, right? We can. And so that sounded pretty smooth. And all I was really doing is taking the D, which is our fourth in A minor, right? We're in a key of A minor. We're going to our fourth, but it's inverted. So I'm not really pulling that far away. And one of the things I do when I come back from this inversion of our fourth is I come back into the sus4, back to my tonic, and it sounds pretty good, right? I mean, right, so you kind of can hear that sixth getting integrated when we start talking about our inversions, and that really is where you're going to start hearing that sixth come together. And you heard how nice it was working with the fourth. Now, the one thing that I want to kind of explain, we talked about, that was more or less, putting some melodies together. But the one thing I do want to explain from the sixth, right, we'll go back to C major. And we spoke about the sixth being an A. Now, the one thing you want to be careful of is you don't want to linger too much on the sixth, because your listener could think, well, I'm not in C major, I'm actually in A minor. So don't hang out on the sixth too terribly much. And we'll talk more about this later in the video. But here, what I do want to talk about from a chord progression perspective is if we're talking about, just say, a 1, 4, 5 sort of thing, right? Right, that's just the C, the F, the G, back to C. Well, what you can do with the sixth is the sixth resolves very nicely up or down, right? So A will resolve to G, or A will resolve to G, or sorry, A will resolve to B, or A will resolve to G very nicely, and that can bring you back to your tonic. So if I wanted to do a 1, 4, 6, from the A, I might want to come back to my fifth and then resolve to my tonic. So I'd be looking at a 1, 4, 6, 5, 1. And so that's where you can kind of play with the sixth in a chord progression, is you can kind of go up or down. Whoops. Or, you know, you can take the A back down. Right, so that's where you kind of work in the sixth interval. It's really looking at your inversions, and in chord progressions, it's allowing you to play to So now let's go ahead and take a step back into the slides and really understand this sixth a little bit better. Okay, so you definitely heard the sounds of some of the chords that sound pretty good, and you know when they start getting used in the inversions, and we're going to jump into that in the next slide. But first, again, right, when you see these add flat sixth, you could hear in the demo of why these aren't always frequently used. But with that, here is kind of a breakdown of the sixth interval, right? When you have the C major sixth, it's added, it's in there, you can hear it. The major triad with the minor sixth, it is not very frequent that you're going to see that at all. The C minor sixth, we heard it. Well, we did an A minor sixth, but it has, you know, it's out there. It can be used. You got to be a little careful with it, but it can definitely be used and sounds pretty good. And then just the minor triad with the minor sixth. When you use that, I don't know, some slasher film with the serial killer on LSD or something, maybe. I don't know. But anyways, this is kind of a breakdown of the sixth interval, and you heard why. But now what I want to do is really talk about where the sixth is used, and where it sounds fantastic. We heard the inversions on the keyboard, and really what we were diving into there, right? We're going to take the first inversion of our C major, and when we look at this, obviously we have the minor third between the E and the G, but when we go from the E to the C, in this case our third to our root, that's going to be a minor sixth, and it sounds really good, right? That is a very stable sound, and this is where you get to play with your inversion some, because that sixth interval, when it's used properly, man, it just comes out and it sounds fantastic. It's just such a great sounding interval, but you just got to be a little bit careful on when to use it. Now down at the bottom, same thing when we're talking about our A minor and we want to talk about our first inversion of this. Again, we have our minor third, that's fine. But when we go from our third to our root, now we have a major sixth, right? But it's still a sixth interval. And again, this is just our inversion. This is our first inversion. Sounds fantastic. Now, because of this major sixth being very commonly used in the first inversion, there are often times where you will see this notation, and that's not an I, that's a Roman numeral 1 with a 6 at the top. And when you see this, what it's saying is this is the first inversion, use the first inversion of the chord because of that sixth in there. So when you see this musical notation, again, with the Roman numeral, And you see that sixth at the top, it's going to say that means use the first inversion, and it's referencing the sixth. Now, when we talk about our inversions, we can't just, say first inversion and leave it alone. There's more to it. And you definitely heard the fourth and the sixth being used together in a manner that they're really meant to be used together. And this is where the second inversion comes in, has a very unique sound. But here, when you see our second inversions, it has the sixth as well as the fourth. And when you use these intervals interchangeably, responsibly, how they're really meant to kind of go together with this second interval, they give your music a really powerful sound, as long as you're careful with them. Now, what you can also see when to use that second inversion is you'll see notation like this, right? Again, that's not an I, that's the first. The first chord, sixth at the top, fourth at the bottom, means second inversion. And it's because of the perfect fourth that we get when we reach our second inversion, right? And these inversions sound good because the sixth and the fourth sound very good together. The diminished fourth, that's a different story. But the sixth and the fourth, they when you're using them correctly together, again with the inversions, a lot of stuff just comes out really, really smooth. But when you just kind of start tacking on these sixths randomly in there, you heard they can get away from you. So, anyways, this is where the sixth is really, this is where it really kind of comes into its own. But what I want to do now is jump into how the sixth works with our chord progressions. And here, I'm just going to bring out the C major scale, and we are going to talk a little bit about our tonic, dominant, and really understanding our mediant, okay? Now, our mediant is our third, right? It's just, if you look at this, you can almost just kind of say, okay, well, the mediant is between my tonic and my dominant, right? You can just kind of say, okay, right? From the C to the G, it's a perfect fifth. We all know this. And our mediant is flat smack in the middle. Now from C to E, that might be 4 frets, but it's not about a mediant being 4 frets or 4 semitones. It's really about the mediant being a third. Because if this were a minor scale, that mediant's only going to be 3 frets, but it's still the third degree in the scale. That's what makes it the mediant. It's not about 3 frets or 4 frets or 3 semitones or 4 semitones. It's about being the third degree in the scale. That's what makes it a mediant, okay? In this case, it just happens to be E, and it happens to be a major third. That's fine. But when we look at this, and we're learning the positions in the scale, we say, okay, well, the mediant, cool. It's in between our tonic and our dominant, and no problem. Now, when we look at the mediant, what's its kind of purpose? Well, its purpose really is it can resolve pretty nicely to its neighbors, right? Now, the one thing about resolving to the second is the second, which in this case is D, the function in our chord progressions, the second really is to kind of move us away from our tonic. So going from a mediant back to a second, it's going to be a little bit weaker of a resolution, but it still sounds good as long as you kind of start moving away. But this is how our mediant really kind of works. And our mediant also sounds very good going and taking us to our sixth, okay? And I want you to keep this interval right here in mind, going from our third to our sixth, and I'll explain why here. Now, as we're looking at this, we definitely look at our dominant as well, right? We have to kind of know because dominant gets us back. But when we look back over at our sixth and we start moving up the fretboard in a different direction, and we go from C, which in this case is kind of out on our octave, and we move from C and we move up a perfect fifth, which in this case is our F. When we look at that, that's a perfect fifth, right? We got a half step, whole step, whole step, whole step from C to F. moving up the fretboard, that's a perfect fifth. Now, our fourth degree in the scale is called a subdominant. Now, a lot of people will look at this and say, okay, well, the subdominant is just one location in the, or one degree in the scale less than the dominant. And that's fine if you want to learn it that way, because you're not going to be wrong. But really, the subdominant implies that it's a perfect fifth back from the octave. And you might be thinking, okay, Jeff, well, you're splitting hairs here. This is ridiculous. Who cares? But here's the thing. When we look at our sixth position in the scale, in this case A, it's called the submediant. So if you say, oh, well, the subdominant is just one degree lower in the scale than the dominant, no problem. Well, then you come over to submediant. And if you're going to remember, like, oh, it's just one less than the mediant, that wouldn't be correct, right? But the submediant, as we can see here, is directly in between our octave and our subdominant. And so really, if you kind of think of scales this way, you really only have to remember half of them, and you're pretty much good to go. And what I mean by half of them, right? So if you just remember one half of the scale is tonic, mediant, dominant, the other half of the scale is octave, submediant, subdominant, right? However you want to look at it, but it can help. But regardless, how do we use the submediant? And we saw this in the demo. It resolves very nicely to its neighbors, just like the mediant resolved very nicely to D and F. In this case, the submediant resolves very nicely to G and B. Now it's going to be a little bit less to the seventh, and this is going to vary on major or minor keys and some of your harmonic or melodic minors. But generally speaking, your mediant gives you an opportunity to kind of play around before you resolve back to your tonic, right? And so here is, once you get out to the sixth, you can kind of play around a little bit here and then resolve back to your tonic. And just like with that, here with the mediant, you can kind of play around and take yourself out into the submediant, right? And so this really works for, strengthening not just your chord progressions, but, how you resolve back to the tonic or pull away. But you can start to explore a little bit more when you see how this sixth, in this case the submediant, kind of helps you, stay out away from your tonic a little bit longer to build up some additional tension and then come back to your tonic, right? So this is something that really the sixth, when it comes to chord progressions, really shines with. And I encourage you to play around with it, because you're going to get different sounds, again, between the major and minor keys. So play around with it. I think you'll get a lot out of it. With all that being said, again, if you've stuck around this long, really appreciate it. Apologies once more for this one being a delayed video. Like I said, I just had a couple things that came up, but I really appreciate you guys sticking around, taking a look at this one. And as always, if you're getting something out of it, always make the request. Give me a thumbs up, and it's free. I don't charge anything. YouTube doesn't charge anything. Hit that subscribe, get notified. What I'm going to be starting to look at, now that we've kind of covered all of our intervals, when we talk about some of the different chords, right? We talked about our sus and everything else. We just looked at the sixth. We're going to start moving into some of the additional chords, but I think I'm going to do some of the add chords first before I get into some of the larger chords. Now with that, one of the things I'm also going to start doing is bringing in some music, actual music reading lessons in there as well, kind of in between some of this. I think it's so incredibly important for us to be able to read music, and it's so easy. It's not hard. It just, there's nuances in there that make it look complicated. So that's kind of where I'm thinking about going in. And once we start bringing in some of that music notation, bringing in some of the classics, will start to make a lot more sense. So anyways, I just kind of wanted to put that out there. But once again, if you've stuck around this long, really appreciate your time. And we will see you in the next video where we will be talking about chords as well as some music notation. All right, with that being said, take care, everybody.